And now for the main event. Today's moderator, Brigid Alverson, writes about comics and graphic novels at Manga Blog, Publishers Weekly, and Comic Book Resources, and is an editor at the Good Comics for Kids blog at School Library Journal. Without further ado, Brigid Alverson.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, all right. So we are very fortunate. We have an awesome panel here today. We are going to be showing you their work as they speak. And what I'd like to start with is each one of our panelists to introduce themselves and then talk about, because I think this is an important thing now, how their work gets to other people. When I was a kid, we would read the newspaper, open up the editorial page, and because I'm very old, there would be a Herblock cartoon. But political comics have so many different forms and so many different pathways now that I thought that it would be a good introduction for everybody to talk about not only what they do, but where they do it. So Keith, do you want to get us started? Our first speaker is Keith Knight.
Gentleman cartoonist, Malden native. So I grew up here in Boston, and very happy to be back. Went to the Celtics game on Friday. It was very, very good. I have been I'm the old man at the con. So I've been in the industry for 30 plus years. I do an autobiographical comic strip. That's what I'm most known for. On the page, the K Chronicles, and then a few years ago, it got developed into a television show called Woke on Hulu, and we got 2 seasons. It stars Lamorne Morris, Emmy Award-winning Lamorne Morris, People's Sexiest Issue Lamorne Morris, so I am sexy person adjacent, and I am one of those people that, when I first started, like the goal was to get a syndicated newspaper strip. And then I watched the whole thing go down the tube. So I had to make the transition to online media. And since I was in San Francisco, I saw it coming, I think, a bit sooner than a lot of people. So I was one of the first cartoonists to jump on to Patreon and just really realized that in order for me to get in front of people, I started doing comic strip slideshows. So for decades, I've been doing comic strip slideshows where I go to universities, colleges, high schools, churches, art spaces, and do presentations. And it's really been an amazing experience for me and a way to get in front of people that wouldn't normally see my work. So that's one of the avenues that I do.
That was actually what got me thinking about it, was thinking about you going and taking your comics to the people.
Yeah.
In a very live way. And
that's it. Like, you got to kind of figure out, like, how can I make this work? How can I get my work in front of people? There's a certain segment of the population that still reads some stuff. And here's the thing. I'm not in many newspapers right now, but I will always, it doesn't matter if I'm in one newspaper. I need to be in there because I need to have a deadline. I need someone calling me up and going, where is it? Because if I was left to my own devices, like, create a comic book every once in a while, I would never get it done. So that really helps. Having a deadline helps.
Mm-hmm. Isabella.
Hi, I'm Isabella Rotman. I do, amongst other things, sex ed comics. How do I get them out there? I have a mix of some published books and some self-published books, and I think there's like a lot of benefits to both. It's like amazing to be published and have things in stores and all over the place, but also I think self-publishing is actually like quite wonderful because no one else's hand is like in it unless you want it to be, and you can distribute it how and where you want it to be. So a few ways I've done that. So I have 2 books. I only have one with me, but I have 2 books that are designed for college campuses to give out to new students at orientation. So this is Not on My Watch, which is about bystander intervention to prevent sexual assault. And colleges will buy like 1,000 of them and give them to like all the incoming freshmen, which is amazing for me. And also I think great because the people who need to read it aren't the ones, well, they are paying for it, but not directly, which is kind of nice. And there's privilege wrapped up in that, but it is a way I found to like get a lot of them out there. These are the published ones. And then my most recent comic is Abortion Pill Zine, which is a practical guide to getting and taking pills for medical abortion. And I did this in collaboration with 2 other authors, Sage Coffey and Marnie Galloway. And we're really fortunate with this zine because it's published by Silver Sprocket, and Silver Sprocket is really aligned with our values in a way I think that no other publisher is. And they were like, we are happy to donate copies. We are happy to let you put it online completely for free. So this exists in like a physical form because we think it's important to be able to like secretly hand it to someone and have them have nothing on their search history. But it also exists online in a way that costs $0. So I think there's a lot of options. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for listening to me.
Noah?
Oh, sure.
Just because this is the order that I did the
Oh, yeah.
in, so.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Noah Jodice. I'm up in New Hampshire right now. I'm a cartoonist like everyone else. But so a lot of my work tends to be in collaboration with like a specific community organization or advocacy group. So whether it's like a zine or a web resource or a PDF or a document, I think a lot of my work ends up in the hands of other people through the channels of organizing. So it becomes, I think, similar to what Isabella was saying, like you can hand it to people without Googling it. So yeah, it's a lot of like word of mouth and leaving things at bus stops and kind of the old-fashioned print way of getting things into people's hands. Certainly there's some amount of it that is like social media, and that's really great, but it feels like that becomes like a short-term thing, and then the longer-term effect is through handing things to friends and people at organizing rallies and things like that. Yeah, so that's kind of the prime way that things are moving around for me.
Camila.
Hi, everyone. My name is Camila Kerwin. I make comics right now primarily about gun violence and the history of gun legislation in the U.S. I also sometimes make short memoir comics about myself. I have a recurring half page in the Boston Globe, so that's the primary way I get my stuff out to people right now. It's a little old-fashioned. It comes out in print on Sunday in the ideas section. And I also am always pitching to different outlets. My background is in public radio, so I pitch a lot to public radio outlets, illustration and comic stuff, and other newspapers, the Washington Post. So my comics primarily meet news readers and are journalistic in style.
And Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Shaw. I'm located in Portland, Maine. I am obviously a cartoonist and illustrator, but I'm also an educator, and I've been teaching for about 15 years. So I used to teach high school and middle school, and now I teach illustration and comics at a small art school in Portland. My comics are mostly autobiographical, and yeah, I was thinking about being on this panel and about, having the term political action comics, but I think being an artist and making work that's like about your life is political in a way, because like you talk about your beliefs, and that comes through in your work. And yeah, I show my work on, all these shows and also online. I have a Substack where I found like a larger audience recently, and I have a zine subscription, so that like gets me making new work all the time. And occasionally I'll publish editorial comics, but I like self-publishing because I do think it still is kind of a radical act to tell your own stories and to put them out there, and I've always been like a big fan of print. So yeah, so I found this is like a good place for me in the work that I do.
So, it seems like it's interesting that, in a way, like everything in our lives is political in one way or another. And I think We're about to all become a lot more conscious of that, in case we weren't already. Looking back to the old days, there was there's comics like you buy in the comic store or the drugstore, and then there's comics that are in the paper. And I remember there was a big controversy about Doonesbury because that had to be on the editorial page of a lot of papers. In a way, editorial and political cartoons were very sort of confined, and also only a small group of people made them. Now it's much more open. So how have you experienced that? What sort of freedom do you feel that you have, or don't you? Because at the same time, we all have to make a living. We have to get along with our families. We have to get along with the people at work. What constraints and what freedom do you have in terms of not just the fact that you're doing it, but also the types of subjects that you approach and your point of view? Anybody can jump in on this one.
It's interesting because, I like the comment that you made that you self-publish and also work with publishers, and there's a certain freedom that comes with self-publishing. When you work with a publisher, they're sort of getting your work ready to be released in 2027 or 2028, and you're just as a self-publisher, you're like, what? That's I could be dead by then. Where self-publishing, it's just
they take out the typos.
Yeah.
As an editor, I have to say that.
No, that is true. That is true. But there's something to be said about. I make mistakes in my self-published work all the time, and. But I think there's something charming, and I love the fact that you leave your comics at
so
bus
cool.
stops and stuff like that, because that's what all the Jack Chick comics, the Bible comics back in the day, and that still happens. And I love the comment that books aren't, self-published zines aren't traceable. There's no search history and stuff, and that's super important because seriously, it's everyone has a dossier now. Everyone knows what everybody does at all times. So it is a radical act to buy print media and to actually read a book and be unplugged. So I think that's really amazing. It's not an answer to your question, but I just wanted to say that,
No, it's a good answer. It is an answer. It is an answer, actually.
But events like this and supporting artists, and just so we're able to exist, and it's going to be harder and harder at supporting, education and libraries and readership, all this stuff. It's our last line of defense, and cartoons and comics telling your story again it's a radical act. But if you all don't tell your story, someone else will, and they get it wrong all the time. I say, when I talk to kids all the time, I say, whatever generation it is, Z or millennials, it's okay, when you read about yourself in the media, what do you read about yourself? Oh, that we're lazy, we're entitled, we're destroying everything. I said, who do you think writes those stories? And it's just bitter old people. And so it's so important to tell your story, whether it's in comics or music or poetry or video, just tell your authentic story. And we can all relate to that. So,
yeah. I also think just length, historically, political cartoons, as you say, single panel, short, quick, snappy, pithy, really distilling an issue of a cultural moment quickly and humorously, or something appalling, something outrageous, something enraging. It was really more, it is and was about a message or a commentary. And now with length, with nonfiction graphic novels, with online scroll formats, you just have a lot more room for narrative in addition to commentary, and that can be less snappy and less pithy, but it creates room for so much more experimentation too. Although sometimes having some constraints is nice. I feel like with just to use myself as an example, having, this recurring half page in the Boston Globe, it's okay, well, I have about 12 panels to work with. What's going to be, first act, second act, third, the constraints help you kind of move, whereas sometimes the open format of a book can be a little paralyzing. But
That's a huge, that's even, I did a daily comic strip for 11 years, and it's easy to work blue, and so to try to come up with things that you can get away with in a family paper it's its own unique challenge, and it's actually a good, it's like you said, it's good to have constraints. George Lucas, here on my Star Wars rant, I do one every panel. George Lucas didn't have any money. He didn't have half the effects. There were sandstorms, all this different stuff, and he made Star Wars. And then he had all the money in the world, no one to tell him no, and he made The Phantom Menace. So it's good sometimes to have people saying no.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think to add on to that as well, it takes a long time to make comics. So not only just like the actual like drawing of and writing of it, but also all the research that you put into it too. So it's not just like a story you can just put out in a day. So there is also that time that you can take with it too, just as the reader as well, to kind of, go through that whole process where you can really spend with a story.
It's a very different kind of communication in a way. I mean, you think of the old style editorial cartoon where there'd be like a rich guy with a bag of money with a dollar sign on it, and like everything was very obvious and it hit you in the face. But I think what's happening now, for the most part, is much more subtle, and for instance, in the panels that are up here, this is a really thoughtful point, and it really struck me. The comic is about Hope, who went to Alaska and was teaching in a school there, and seemed like it was like a really good thing, and she felt like she was doing something that was meeting a need. And yet we now know that the legacy of those schools is, oftentimes very bad. And so the point that is being made is much more subtle. It's like, listen to people, don't just do what you want to do. But I think often a story can be more compelling. And Isabella, your zines are really practical, which
Yes.
I love. I used to say, I'm a Martha, not a Mary, and I was raised Catholic. I don't know if you know what that means, but it's like, because I like to do stuff, not sit around and think. And I feel like your zine, so yeah, talk a little bit about, and even having the freedom to do that, which was the kind of thing that, like, in my day would be like circulated underground by women in women's collectives, and now that's happening again.
Yeah, I think I have been very lucky to have come into my career in a time where I could really do whatever I wanted and to live in places where I could really do whatever I wanted. And a lot of the time what I wanted to do was that I would see a lot of conceptual talking. So the Not on My Watch zine came about because at the time there was a huge amount of talk about sexual assault on campuses. I had graduated only 3 years prior to that. And everyone was quoting studies about why bystanders choose not to intervene and how often bystanders choose to intervene. And there was a huge amount of study on that. And there were some training courses that you could take in person about how to intervene. But I couldn't find really any articles that were okay, so you've decided to intervene. Here's what to do. I was like, well, this is frustrating. Even if I'm okay, this is a thing I want to do. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it in a way that mitigates risk of making the situation worse. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make that. And most of my books have come from a place of I'm seeing a lot of people saying that this is the right thing to do, and I agree, but I'm not seeing a lot of people saying how to do it. So I wanted to make those resources. And also I think that comics are just so good at that. The combination of words and pictures, the ability to use diagrams, and then the innate non-pretentiousness of comics. I know there's a lot of pretentious comics, but I think you have to kind of try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think comics have a lowbrow air to them that makes people feel that they're not being condescended to.
Well, it's such a democratic medium. You only need a piece of paper and a pencil to make them. You
Yes.
don't need all of these really expensive fancy supplies.
You don't need a film crew or anything. So I think just the fact that it is a comic can make it more accessible to a lot of people. So sometimes, like, all the information in the abortion pill zine is information you can read on the Planned Parenthood website and Plan C website. We're like, let's just deliver it in another way. Let's deliver it in a way with pictures. People who learn visually might have a better time with that. Let's have characters deliver information because it's easier to learn if you're, like, following a narrative. And yeah, I think in one way it's like, how can we make it more accessible? And in another way, it's just understanding that people absorb information differently and giving them more ways to get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also add on to that. Like, I think a really nice thing with, especially if it's an idea that's unfamiliar to somebody, like bystander intervention, or like in my case, like police abolition. I think something that's so nice about this form is that it's unassuming, and therefore, like, if you're not like ready to go in there yet and be like, I'm gonna take on this idea and figure out what it means, the comic or the zine just like stays there and waits for you.
Yeah.
And like when it's time, it's there. It can kind of like agitate you little by little towards the idea. And I think that's something that like social media can't really do very effectively, because it just kind of like pushes you a little more. And this is like it's just like it's there, it's ready, it's unassuming in that way that like it's gonna let you have the conversation when it's time to have that conversation.
That's why I love books for sex ed, because especially like a young person, you can give them the book and they can absorb it on their own time when they're ready, and not feel embarrassed about having to do it with an adult.
Right. Or you can give it to somebody who might. Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, I'm hoping the parent's the one who gave it to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like sometimes it's like giving it to somebody who you think maybe should be thinking about that idea a little more, and, you know.
Yeah.
Erica Moen's book, sex book. Mm-hmm. I just kept that in my bag the whole time. And my 16-year-old, when he was 14, read the whole thing. You know, it's just I talked about this yesterday. The best way, if you want your kids to read a book, is to put it up on a really high shelf at the top, and tell them you can read any book in the whole house, but don't read those books up there, and then they'll read those books.
I love that.
So smart.
So I think, you know, part of what we're talking about here is political action, and I think it's sometimes very hard. I know I'm a writer, I'm not a visual artist, and sometimes to take the things that I feel the most strongly about, I can write them down, but then it's just going to annoy people. Like convincing people, it's one thing to express how you feel. It's another thing to bring someone else into that space. So I want to talk to you about how do you maximize the impact of your images? How do you even step outside of yourself and your own feelings and think about the viewer and how they'll interact with it? How do you make a convincing cartoon is basically the question.
I feel like this is something I've been thinking about a lot. Sometimes I actually do the opposite of what I want to do. What I want to do is rage and, you know, shake my fist and kind of transplant that on the page. But what works better, what can be more powerful, is to actually use a lot of restraint in moments like that and really just lean into what is the fact here. Like, let the actual fact speak for itself and allow the reader to do some of the work of reacting to that narrative or that story. Especially in journalism, because part of your job is to not only communicate a story or a fact or an idea, but also to establish trust. And one of the ways you do that is, especially with my background in journalism, is, you know, you need the reader to believe or to know that you're gonna name the, you know, enraging things, but you're also willing to name some of the things that might be inconvenient to, you know, your position or your cause. You have to be able to name the entire spectrum of truth, even when it's really complicated, even when it's really hard, even when it, you know, just muddies everything up. So when I'm feeling like I just want to use a lot of adjectives, I kind of force myself to, you know, like, how can I distill this to its most basic, most elemental, most sort of fact-heavy sentence?
I like it.
Humor helps too.
Yeah.
Humor helps. Humor is the medicine it's the thing that makes the medicine go down. So if you can get people to come into it laughing, and then at the end punch them in the face. That's the way, it's my favorite way of doing it.
That's nice, Keith.
It's, I think it's, especially coming from, the history of my ancestors in this country. Like we used humor to, keep from crying all the time. So it's like it's really powerful to humor. There's a fine line between humor and tragedy, and so I think that's important. I feel like I come from a long legacy of humorists that comment on America and its foibles.
I think in memoir, you have to be really vulnerable and just be genuine and just tell your story so that other people, even if they haven't been through that same experience, they can, learn and relate. And I think that's why I just love reading all types of memoir, because that's how you just learn about other people and their experiences and empathize with people. And I think comics does that really well. And in my latest comic I made was about abortion, and I showed it to one of my friends, and she was like, "Why is this so prudish?" She's like, "You're making this comic, like, put some more sex in it." I'm like, all right. So, sometimes, like, you just have to put yourself out there. If you're going to make that kind of work, I think you just have to go, like, all into it.
Curious. Humor. I'm with Keith on humor. Another thing that I try to do, especially if I'm talking about a very feminist subject, is reel myself in and not be antagonistic towards my reader. So I think a lot of people might not want to approach these topics because they feel like they're going to get yelled at for something they have done wrong. And perhaps they have done things wrong, but what I want is for them to listen to me, and I don't think they're going to if I tell them off first. So the way I usually approach things is just like, here's the information. What do you think? Do you want to do the thing that I think's the right thing to do? And here's how to do it. And that's generally how I try to approach that. And I think a lot of times comics around the subjects I write about are very they're preaching to the choir. They're preaching to people who already agree with them. Mm-hmm. And I try to step just a little bit to the side of that. And I don't really think I'm convincing people who fully disagree with me of anything. Yeah. But I do think I might convince a lot of people who are like, I'm interested in that, but I'm embarrassed about how little I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think one of the advantages that I have when I do community engaged design, illustration, comic stuff, which I think speaks to a lot of what everybody else is talking about, is that there's a certain amount of mediation and what's happening in the collaborative process is kind of really fruitful, because you're not I get to take my ego out of it and say this isn't really about me or my story or whatever. This is about the people who are engaged in this process and their story. And so the convincing actually happens in the group of people who are getting together to say this is the idea that we're trying to convey. How are we going to come together as an organization, as a group of community members, as whatever that might be, and tell that story. And then I become kind of a little bit of a megaphone, and I can make it look nice and put it in a package. But I find that part really productive, because it's there's this whole process of learning with the people that you're making the thing with, and that I think can almost be more powerful than what happens with the object afterwards. Is these people came together. This is actually a really good example. So the folks that came to me to work on this community justice exchange, they had done this process over 2 years of getting together with other organizations and talking about this idea of dismantling carceral debt. What would that look like? How could we do it? And what they came to was we actually don't know. We don't have a good answer. We know that that's what we want. We have no, here's all the information that we put together in the process of confronting that idea, testing that concept. But we're going to put it in this report so that other people can pick that up and go from there. So there's not really a ton of convincing happening other than to say, here are the questions we wrestled with, and here's where we're at. maybe you can pick that up and go further. And I love that about the medium of just like, this can be a time capsule for a question and what comes after that.
Yeah, I love that because we don't have all the answers to everything. And so just the idea of what you did here with this image and showing like how much of a shakedown the prison system is like, and like I got this newsletter someone sent me from prison that has just all these different things that will shake down prisoners, from like getting pictures of women sent like in letters. Like I'm sure it's like some guy who writes all these letters like, I love you, here's some pictures, and he gets pictures off the internet. And then to like, lawyers and I was talking about even about mugshots. I do this thing called the Black Mugshot Project, which is trying to get people, this country to pass laws banning posting mugshots because it destroys people's lives. And just the amount of grift, like there are shell companies out there that will say like, we'll scrub the internet of your mugshot if you give, pay $1,000, $500, like, and they're the same people that spread the mugshots around. It's all terrible. So just, this is it's. I don't think a lot of people understand just how crazy to get caught up in the prison system, how horrible it is.
And I think like reading your comic, this comic in particular, brought me into a space. Somehow I've managed to never be arrested. And so like reading a comic can be a way of sharing someone's experience that you may never have. But in order to understand how things work, you have to understand them from the point of view of different people. If you want to change things, you have to say, what is this experience like? And like, honestly, this comic is horrifying. But it was also very educational. And I think because of the narrative structure, that's definitely something that comics can do.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Like with this comic specifically, like I didn't write it. So the organizers who put it together did. But one of the goals can be like using narrative for a specific audience versus using a diagram for another audience, or finding that right combination of audience and form that allows somebody the space to into the story. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, Sarah, again, the story of hope was the same thing. Like you follow someone, you see them, you identify with them, and you learn to look at things through their eyes, and then to step outside and look at things from the outside. I don't, this may or may not have happened, but have you ever had the experience of your comics escaping containment and like, going viral or attracting attention in some way? And if so, what was that like?
I've seen things go viral for things that, weren't intended. And it's really interesting to see I'm sure you've all experienced this in some way, shape, or form too, where people will change some of the words or change some of the things and then put it out there, and it becomes something. I can't. I did one about. One of my most controversial ones was I did this one where it was basically. Someone was a young black man was about to be lynched, and he's on the chair, things going around, the noose is going around his neck, and he's like, "You're doing this because I'm black, aren't you?" And then one from the group of white people are like, "Oh, now see, why do you always have to play the race card?" and so it ends up going viral because black students on campus don't feel safe. And seeing that sort of reminds them of that. And so, they have something against the cartoon, but more the climate on campus. So So I get invited to explain myself, and the first thing I do is have a conversation with the black students, and they say, well, it's not about your cartoons, it's about sort of, it was sort of like the last straw. Like, it was this Western Pennsylvania campus where apparently there are, I forgot how many groups, but like a huge amount of registered hate groups in the area within like 10 miles of the area or something crazy like that. And the thing that stuck out to me was like, how do you register a hate group? Like, that's the first thing I thought, like, and how many unregistered hate groups are there out there? Yeah. But so when I speak, I say, like, it's not, my cartoon is not the problem, and that's usually what happens. And it's the same thing. It's what happened with like hip hop records in the late '80s, early '90s. It's like, fuck the police. Like, everyone's getting mad at the artist doing that, but like, why are they writing that? Like, it and then everyone gets a cell phone, and now everyone's saying, yeah, fuck the police. You don't punish the artist and the art for just reflecting what they see and what they experience. And so another one I did was a cruel joke to play on a black jogger. So it was just like a jogger running down the street who walks by a white dude, and the white dude goes, thief, and points at him, and then the cops show up and beat up the black jogger. So I get a phone call from an editor, and she said, hey, like, all these people are calling and saying, mad at your comic strip, protesting your comic strip. And I said, well, what are they saying? And she says, well, it's white people calling. She said, and she knows that because white people always announce that they're white. Whenever people write to me, they go, I'm a white man and I like your strip. Like, only white people do this. And so she says, I'm a white person and I find this, racist or whatever. And she goes, what do you want me to say? And I say, the strip is not racist. It's reflective of what is society, it's reflective of society. And I said, you tell them that if they got as bent out of shape out of the real thing that this is depicting, then something probably would be done about it, instead of getting mad at a bunch of scribbles in a newspaper, So I got dropped from the paper soon after that. But it's like, it's just silly to blame the artist, to blame the messenger is just, it's interesting. But, just keep on doing what you're doing. That's all. Oh, I did. I mean, I've been doing these strips. I did that strip probably 20, 25 years ago, My show on Hulu is all around a time where I was profiled by the police, the pilot. And, that incident that happened to me in 1999, And my dad has stories of being hassled by Boston police, 50, 60 years ago, and it's the farther you go back, the worse it gets, and it's just that we have cell phones now, so we, white people are starting to see it. Well, white people did see it back then, but they took pictures themselves and made postcards and sent it around. But it's not politically correct to do those these days, so we just have the cops do it, and we put it on social media. So it's a wild world. I think, but all the things that happen in this country just get repurposed and renamed. So slavery begat Jim Crow, begat the prison industrial complex. Like, we just go through phases, and then we make sure no one learns about real history, and so we just think it's all new every time. So that's America in a nutshell.
That kind of brings me around to what I think is a really important question, given that this is about political action and comics, which is what you want after someone reads your comic. What do you want to happen next? Do you want them to think? Do you want them to act? Do you want them to make their own comic? I mean, sort of like, what do you want to leave the reader with? Because comics is a two-way communication, and so I want to know what you want the other side to think once you're done with it.
If they have kids and firearms in the home, I want them to buy a gun safe. That's kind of number one for parents. And if not, I want them to vote locally.
Oh yeah, can I just like do a quick PSA? I used to work for the mayor of Melrose. Like, your local politicians have a huge impact on your life. Please pay attention to all the elections, even the teeny tiny ones. Catherine Clark, who's now the number 2 person Democrat in the House of Representatives, started out on the Melrose School Committee. And I covered her as a newspaper reporter back then. So I've watched that whole process go. So yeah, definitely. Also, this comic is absolutely heartbreaking.
Thank you.
Yeah, the story of Joaquin. So yes.
Thank you.
All right, good. So you want people to take action.
Yeah, I want people to take action, and I think, maybe on a bigger, more philosophical scale, I don't want people to just write off half the country, right? I want people to feel like maybe they can talk to people who they thought they would never be able to talk to, or that it would just be too frustrating or too much of a wall. Part of what I'm bringing to my work is, my late stepfather was a gun owner. I grew up with a lot of guns in the house. If he were still alive, we would have very different political opinions. And I'm not saying, we all need to go out and debate and change each other's minds, but just keeping talking, keep the conversation going, I do think is kind of unavoidable for any sort of future for our country.
Exactly.
Yeah. And vote locally.
Yeah, the whole idea of, I think we spend so much time concentrating on the sort of national picture when, the amount of what, and very little about the local picture, but it's almost inverse. Like, the locally are the decisions that the local people make affect us more immediately than, but of course all this gets attention, all the national stuff gets attention, but it just, I went away to Germany and unplugged for 2 weeks, and it was the greatest therapy I could have possibly imagined. It was really nice. But when people read my, I hope people laugh. I hope people think at the same time. If they don't laugh, they think. If they don't think, they laugh. And just understand that there are different points of view, and that the comic, it's different audiences, right? I want black folks to know that, this is from your point of view, and you don't see it that much in education, in mainstream media, and all that stuff. And also, being a black nerd, being outside the box or something like that. But from people on the outside looking in who aren't black, that there are other, experiences out there, and that you can learn a lot from what you don't learn. We spend, I said this yesterday, you spend 18 years learning a bunch of bullshit, and then you spend the rest of your life trying to vomiting that up and learning real stuff. So it's I think everybody telling their stories helps get to the real of it all.
Absolutely.
Yep. I have a lot of goals with my comics. I think first and foremost, most of my comics are about providing information. So the first goal is just that they finish reading it and they have the information when and if they're in the situation the comic's about. So my comics about sex ed and consent, everyone's going to be in a situation where they have to understand consent. Most people are going to be in situations where having good sex ed information is going to be very, very valuable to them and whoever they're with. But some of my other comics, I hope, people don't ever have to be in those situations. But I want them to have the information, and I want them to be able to give the information to their friends if their friends and family ever need it. On like a more subtle level, I want to kind of encourage a certain mindset of caring about people and not giving people a hard time because of like hard things they're going through. I hope that empathy. I hope that comes across in a way where I'm not like, be empathetic, but just like having characters being empathetic to each other, and maybe you're like, oh, that seems nice. And also, I want people to like read my like crappy little zines and be like, oh, I could make a crappy little zine about what I care about and leave it at the, you know, post office box or whatever. So yeah, that's the one of the biggest things that I love about zines is that they're easy to make and no one can stop you from making them. And if people read my zines and they're like, oh, I care about this different thing, I'm going to make a little mini about that, then I'm really, really happy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of like making comics about these topics too is like just for our own education and learning. And I know with like the book I'm working on with Finding Hope, like I've learned so much just through my research through her history that I never learned in school, just about like the, you know, the boarding schools in Alaska and the internment camps in the, you know, Pacific Theater during World War II, all this stuff that, you know, if other people read it and they like it, that's great. But a lot of it I'm making just like for my own education too. And like Isabella mentioned earlier too, I think a lot of it, you know, is kind of preaching to the choir with the you know, who ends up reading, at least like, you know, my work. But you know, if someone could come away thinking they might want to make something, or they might want to, you know, research something a little bit further too, I think that's awesome.
I echo everything that you said. Go make more zines. You know, read more comics, make comics. I think specifically with my work, you know, the goal is often to pose questions to people and to so questioning your own beliefs or your own doubts is really important. I really like, I didn't write the title for this guy, but the subtitle of this is Messages When Facing Doubt. And so I like that idea of this being an incomplete process by which like leaving the comic or the zine is not the end even of your conversation with that thing, that you can keep coming back to it for more if you need it, that it is like kind of, even as somebody who made this, it continues to be a resource. For those of you who are inclined towards, making things, getting a printer or some way of printing things, especially when it's not laser jets are all like, they have little yellow ink on them that actually tells like cops where things were printed. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has done a lot of really good research on this. This is my like little soapbox. So especially if you can find like an old mimeograph, then let's get together and make a printing collective.
I need more info on that.
This is getting really old school.
So obviously, like this has been true in other times. It's true now. It's been true, you know, the past many years. But yeah, radical underground printing and self-publishing is not only, you know, an act of self-expression, but it's an act of preservation of the culture. You know, reaching back towards, like, I often think about like Ida B. Wells and folks like that who were going out and doing this act of like making, you know, documents of their time under great duress and under threat of punishment and violence. And you know, hopefully that is not something that you personally encounter, but like it is. There's the potential for that. So this is an important time, I think, to be making things that, you know, have direct connection to each other and forming relationships like that. More than anything, like if you read a zine or a comic that is about a political idea and you are impassioned by that, going into your community and looking for the folks who are already working on that, because they are likely there, you know, even in the smallest of towns. And going to their meeting and listening to what they're working on and trying to help them make that a reality, like that's the best possible relationship that can come out of this.
I think that's a really important point, especially now as we are about to go into, I mean, I think what many of us regard as like a dark period is like, what do we do? And I think one of the things that comics and zines tell you is you're not alone. You know, there are other people who are already thinking about this. There are, and for instance, Isabella, your zine has a lot of information about like resources, you know, like abortion resources and stuff like that. It also seems like there's something just sort of inherently subversive about zines, like just the act of making them and being outside of the lines.
It's quite fun.
Yeah. I'm sure if you're talented, I'm not, but you know, and then like distributing them kind of in an underground sort of way. And so I guess that's the last thing I want to talk about is like what sort of challenges do you see coming up, and how do you, and I think probably your work is going to be, all of you, going to be more relevant than ever, but in harder ways. So what are you looking for the future to bring? Yeah, that was an easy question, right? Define the universe and give 3 examples. Yeah.
One of the challenges I think is that's specific to comics journalism in general is that it still feels a little bit like the Wild West, like an emerging kind of medium. And, you know, like the news has, you know, mainstream media, you know, institutions are already, you know, and have been in like this sort of soul-searching moment where they're, you know, figuring out their own blind spots and their own, you know, harmful patterns. And add to this, some people don't like seeing comics in newspapers. One of the challenges I faced with last summer, I did a piece in the Washington Post about the Republican lawmaker who was responsible for basically banning federal research into gun violence for like 20 years. And I made the mistake of looking at the comments on Instagram about it. And like the top comment, not the top comment, one of the comments that was high up was like, did they have to do this in a comic format so that conservatives would understand it? Which was a really interesting way to insult both me and conservatives at the same time. But I think that there's still just like, I guess what I'm trying to answer your question is like in just establishing trust with everyday people and with readers and sort of establishing comics as a worthy medium, you know, that can and will tell journalistic stories infused with commentary as they do, but tell heavy-hitting, you know, hard stories that are only going to become more and more urgent to tell.
Anybody else have thoughts on the future?
I just, you know, in some ways, I almost think that the dismissal of comics in the United States may actually help us, and then be like, oh well, it's just a cartoon. Like who cares? Like, you know, whereas there are cartoonists in other countries that the government puts hits on them.
True.
And they get jailed and everything. You know. I'm hoping it doesn't get to that, but, you know, I guess famous last words, but I don't know. I just think that, like, times like this, you know, we just say, okay, let's go, let's do it. Let's you know, I think our best work happens when in times like this and not that it's been all, you know, blueberries and, and I don't know, ice cream for the, you know, any pastime, but it's motivation to get out there and do the work. So
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I have no reason to believe it will be something I want to happen or good for me or my friends in any way. My guiding principle when doing this kind of work and faced with this kind of moment in history is like just trying to think about like how can I contribute to the causes I believe in a way that will make a difference and that like complements my skills. So like what am I good at? What do I like to do? And how can that possibly help? And just like kind of starting from that point. And that's why like what I am doing is making comics and putting the ones that I think are most important for free on the internet because like that's what I'm good at. But that doesn't mean that like there's so many things that have to happen and there's so many different ways that people can move towards those goals. And I don't know, just keep going, I guess. What else is there to do?
Right.
And
Consider the alternatives.
I think it is a great time for making comics too, because there's just, it's becoming more of a mainstream medium. That even just statistics of how many more comics are in public libraries now, zine collections in public libraries and in school libraries. And I think it's an exciting time to be like communicating in this way. And there is, research that our brain, like we think more in comics. We as kids, we think about like words and pictures and how they work together. So I do think that there will be a lot of creators like making new and great work during this time.
Sometimes the best art comes from the worst times. But it's going to be tough. I'm really glad that you all are here to make your comics and to tell people about what they need to know, to help people ask the hard questions, to give them the information, and to maybe let them think about, something beyond their own immediate self. So I want to thank you all, and I want to thank our audience. You've been awesome. I'm really glad that we had this opportunity. All of our creators are on the floor. Wait, sorry. Here's where they are, so you can visit them and see their comics. And thank you all for coming, and thank you all for speaking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bridgid.